Before I started to draw this doorway, I did something I often recommend, and that's I did a quick outline drawing to get a sense of where the problems were going to be. And I knew that this area was going to be the challenge most particularly. And what this let me do was to see exactly beforehand the sorts of mistakes I was going to make as I tried to understand exactly the complexity of the angle of what I was drawing. And it certainly helped me do a better job of my finished drawing than I would have had otherwise. If you saw my video how to draw daisies, I did something similar with the daisies. It can be very helpful to do a really quick outline sketch just to see exactly where the sorts of mistakes we're going to make in either observation or in our line work are going to happen. And then we can be prepared for that when we do the actual drawing. So let's start the actual drawing now. I decided to start with the straight line section of the door, working out the perspective angle from the top of one straight side to the other. Now I always knew, particularly from my quick sketch beforehand, I knew that the recesses were going to be the tricky part of this. So I'm just trying to get some of the perspective angles sorted. The fact that the very top of the doorway has been cut out of the photo is a bit annoying because it does slow me down and make it a bit difficult to work out exactly what's where, because the top of the doorway is not the top of the door. You just saw me put the pencil down there to see how close to the side of the doorway, the side of the inner doorway, if you like, the outside top of the doorway was, and it was really quite close to the inner doorway, for want of a better expression. And it is tricky with these recessed, arched and curved windows and doorways to work out all of the surfaces. And fortunately for my style, it's a fairly forgiving style if we don't have to be too exact with every line, which I'm certainly not going to be with this drawing, because we have these, if you like, wedges that appear as points on the left side that widen out as they then come more into view as they move around to the right side of the doorway. So we need to allow for them and see where they form and where they disappear, particularly when some of them catch light and some of them don't. Now I'm also working out where these courses of stonework go, and of course these need to follow the perspective pattern of the overall drawing, because they also change direction according to a certain pattern as they move across the thickness of the doorway, and that partly helps to describe, if you like, the shape of that inner doorway, the fact that it's not just straight. So I try and do those as best I can. I'm a little upset that where I started my vertical lines, I let my pen rest just for a moment too long before I start to draw the line, and therefore I get a bit of a bleed of ink into a blob. So now I do the divisions for the doorway, and when I looked at it, it looked to me like the door wasn't being divided into equal sections, that the lowest section was the narrowest and the next section was a bit narrower than the one above that. So I position this grill, presumably so that the big security door, if you like, doesn't have to be opened to find out who's on the other side. So there's a very heavy grill here. And now we have the decorative ironwork on the outside. Now with anything that follows a symmetrical pattern, it's important that we try and get a look of symmetry in what we're doing. So I find it best to do the symmetrical elements at the same time. But the ironwork isn't exactly the same in every case, because some of the curves are slightly different and there are some elements in slightly different places. And I put lots of little round thick dots in to indicate some of the studs that catch the sunlight. I don't intend to do too much line work for any sense of texture, so I feel like these heavy dots do add a bit of visual interest to the doorway. The only thing I really intend to do is hatching lines for the shadow and the shade within the recesses of the doorway up the top. So continuing to do this pattern in the way that I've sort of somewhat simplified way I've defined it. So the important thing is that all these sections look the same at this point, rather than that they exactly follow the reference. And so now I'm putting the very wide planks of wood in the doorway, and we kind of have a door in a doorway now. I think this is a church somewhere in Prague. I think the photos around it were in Prague, so if anyone perhaps recognizes it, you might like to tell us in the comments. So now I'm looking at, just exactly where some of these joins between the large stones are, and I'm now trying to work out exactly where to put the hatching lines for the shadows and the shade in this section. There is a difference between shade and shadow. I do have a video on that. If you don't know the distinction, it's well worth watching the video, particularly if you do watercolor, because it affects color as well. So I'm not wanting to get too bogged down here. One of the helpful things about hatch lines and doing things such as this is we can sometimes just correct curves in the process. We can push them out just a little bit more and make them slightly fuller, or sometimes we can do the opposite and make lines that are a bit straight lines that slant a bit. We can just push them and make them a little straighter than we originally drew them. So there's just a little bit of shadow on the door on the right hand side, and then there was this little stone carving just to the left that I thought would be interesting to add. And now I'm really just sort of standing up every now and then and thinking, is there anything else? Should I make this a bit darker? I didn't want to risk it becoming too black looking up the top. I probably didn't quite do it as dark as it is in the reference. Look, this is an incredibly difficult drawing, but why not give it a go? What have you got to lose? You can get the reference off my YouTube channel community page and just see how you go. But I do suggest you do a quick rough out drawing first, just to alert you to the things that might be difficult. I was going to give up a few minutes in, but I'm glad I persevered. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting and even helpful, and why not give it a go? Even though it's a hard drawing for a beginner, there's a lot we can learn sometimes by trying to do things that really push us. It's not a good practice to do all the time, but it can be a helpful occasional thing to do. But look, whatever you draw and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun, and I'll see you next time. Bye.